Hi, welcome to the channel. So now this is another video, a very short one about basically just how students, some of the rules that that apply to students in Switzerland, which I learned and would like others to also learn about it. So the first thing is they are only allowed to work 15 hours. Now, the 15 hours are quite strict, and you actually lose. I know in many countries there's a limit to how many hours a student can work, but in many countries they also don't really enforce it. But in Switzerland, I can assure you they do enforce it, and it's really, really 15 hours. There are very few people who would like to take that risk because the penalty for the employer is quite high. The second, except during the holidays where they can work 40 hours like everybody else. But of course, you also need to rest, right? The second rule is that when you're flanking, the flanking when you fail, you risk losing your student permit. So normally the student permits are renewed and your grades are taken into consideration. So if you're flanking and retaking and retaking and retaking, you do risk losing it at some point. Then the other one is they cannot have dependents. So well, PhD students can have dependents. So PhD students, because they are also making money. Normally, when you're doing your PhD, you are making some money. You're actually employed to either by the university or by the whatever research institute. So you are making something. So then they are allowed to have dependents. But normal college students cannot have dependents. I think this is for most countries that students cannot have dependents. Um, then the next one, which I think many people really need to consider, is the fact that, okay, when you're a non-EU student, oh, first of all, this changed because when we came, one of the requirements was you had to leave the country. Even if you're offered a job, you had to leave the country and then come back. Now this has changed. You have, I think, 3 months to 6 months to find a job. So I think it's 3 months if you're non-EU and 6 months if you're EU. So you need to find a job. Now the scary part about this is your employer has to prove that he could not get anybody else to do the job for him to be able to make a permit for you. There's a slight exception, which is very slight, depending on also on how you performed, where your employer can actually get away with just employing you based on the fact that you graduated from a Swiss university. And yeah, so they can, most of the time this happens when somebody transitions from internship to the job. And yeah, that kind of helps that way. So it does make a bit of a difference, just not that much of a difference. Like it's not something you can count on, to be honest. Okay, next is the fact that accommodation is very expensive. So if you're not living in the school, and accommodation is expensive and hard to find. So if you are in the big cities, so Geneva, Lausanne, Zurich, accommodation is already hard to find and very expensive. So when you're a student, this becomes doubly hard. There are very few universities that actually do also help you with accommodation. Some of them do, some of them don't. Some of them have agreements with hostels where you're given priority, some of them don't. So this is something to really find out from the university, because the hostels you can pay something like 500 or 400 a month. If you rent a room in somebody's house, which is the option that you will end up with if you don't get the thing, it can cost you between 900 and 1,200. So it is really important for you to be able to get a hostel, um, which of course not every university has. uh, Granted, there are some students, especially students who are Swiss, who would maybe get their parents to rent an apartment and then they sublet different rooms to other students. So that is also an option, but you can't always count on that because they also have their friends. Yeah. The other thing is so for the English speaking universities, the international universities actually, they're quite on the expensive side. They're really expensive. Most of them are around 25 to almost 40,000 a year. So that's on the expensive side. And many of them do not even have really significant scholarships. They would have scholarships that would cover maybe a quarter of that. So you still have to pay quite a big amount. The local universities, like for example, University of Geneva, does have some master's courses or some certificates in English. However, most of those courses do not offer student permits. So they are actually geared towards English speaking people who are already in the country or English speaking people who have EU nationality, therefore do not necessarily need the student permit. Somebody told me that that has changed. I tried looking on the website and I cannot see where it shows that actually provide um, the student permits. So I don't know, but even when they do provide the student permit and it's a bit more expensive, it's still cheaper than the international schools. Now, the trick is getting in. Getting in is really hard. I don't know why, but like Geneva University, the translation department, it is so hard to get into. And of course, they have a percentage that is for Swiss educated students, and then the rest is for the international students. But the international students part is so hard to get into. I know three people who got in, and they were like, they feel like they left their sweat and their blood on the exam room. They just find that it was just unnecessarily hard to get into. Um, so I don't know how good it is, but yeah, that's one of the things that I know that it's really hard to get into. Maybe they just have less spaces. I don't know, but yeah, that's one thing that I know. Okay, so that's it. I guess there's nothing else that I can say about the stresses of studying in Switzerland.